Funding for the Armenian Americans is made possible by a grant from the Manugian Simon Foundation.
Like so many Armenian stories, ours begins in a traditional way. Jamanagin gar u chigar. Once there was, and once there was not, an ancient people whose history, some say, began with this mountain. And like all stories, there was a beautiful woman, a king, a dungeon, and a saint. Throughout time, these people survived through suffering, wars, even near annihilation. And in the end, they celebrated those things they held dearest of all, their love of family, God, and most of all, life. It has been said, a small nation can disappear and knows it. Perhaps this is why Armenians stick together. Some call us a close-knit community, but we feel more like a large, extended family.
You know, when you meet another Armenian, it's like you're meeting another brother or another cousin. And inevitably, when you sit down, you find out that you have some commonality. You know the same people. You may even end up being related or from the same village.
I'm totally prejudiced for other Armenians. I will always give the other Armenian a break. If it's an Armenian who is somebody who's pumping gas to somebody who does the laundry, if I can give an Armenian business, you bet that I will.
Incredibly, incredibly loyal. As a, you know, and a real strong sense of appreciation for blessings in life.
You always feel you're connected psychically and spiritually to this enormous ancient past that's been through lots of trauma, many infernos, but has survived. And I think survival is clearly cultural survival, not mere physical survival, but cultural survival and a kind of ability to turn cultural survival into revitalization is something that Armenian culture is defined by.
Perhaps survival is synonymous with being Armenian. It is, after all, what led us to America and helped us establish our first community.
I think Worcester represents a genesis, a beginning of a life in America. Perhaps I can best tell this by telling you what happened when an Armenian immigrant comes to Ellis Island well before the turn of the century. And the immigration official says to the Armenian, "Where are you going?" The Armenian says, "To America." And the official says, "But you're in America now." And the Armenian says, "Oh no, Worcester is America." He wouldn't believe that he was in the United States until he set foot in this city.
It was in Worcester that we first found work to support our families.
There was a particular factory, a wire factory, that just recruited Armenians. And that was when they needed wire desperately for women's hoop skirts or for telephone wire. And they were excellent workers. They wouldn't give the employees a hard time. They were not interested in the labor movement, and they would essentially work for less than the prevailing wage rate.
As we settled into this new country, many of our ancestors started businesses.
They became like the grocers. There were many grocers, like my father being an example, or tailors.
My father came to Worcester and opened up a candy store in Worcester. He was a bachelor at the time, and his ambition was to go to Cornell and study agriculture, become a farmer.
Any discussion of Armenian business needs to include the rug business.
I think most people's experience in the rug business here, a lot of consumers, when they've been involved with rugs or buying rugs, it's been in connection with an Armenian. So I think that's the origin of the stereotype.
I was in the service. Someone said, "Oh, go on, you rug merchant." I said, "What?" I had never heard of rug merchant. This guy was from Hartford, Connecticut, a big Irishman. He said, "You rug merchant?" And I said, "What do you mean, rug merchant?" I had never heard of it, honestly.
This was one thing that they knew in the old country, and I think it was just kind of an interesting and an easy commercial opportunity.
Opportunity beckoned, and we followed.
Worcester on the East Coast, Fresno on the West Coast, in like all ethnic groups, they all went where they heard that there was a community. So they all came in. In California, it was only Fresno.
There was a wave of Armenians that hit the San Joaquin Valley and made a lasting impression up there. I mean, some of the best farmers in the United States are from the San Joaquin Valley, and they have Armenian heritage.
My father's father was a farmer, and he had heard that Fresno had very good soil and very good weather and would like to explore the family's monetary strength here. So they packed up and came.
My father started out by packing figs. It didn't go over too good because of the language barrier. So he thought, well, maybe I better try farming, something he never had done in his life. It's a challenge when you go into something you've never done in your life. Just like it was a challenge when we went in the raisin business years later. People look at me and say, what do you know about the raisin business? Well, it's a challenge. You just take it. If you have confidence in yourself, you do it. And we did it, the two of us.
Never afraid of hard work, our communities spread across America.
My grandmother was a dressmaker, my grandfather was a tailor, and together they set up shop in Philadelphia and made a good living. These Armenians came with nothing, absolutely nothing. And eventually, after the genocide, they would come with even their country destroyed, no education and so forth. And within a generation, they used what skills they had to become middle class.
My father he left school when he was 13 and started a very successful supermarket business in Portland, Maine, called Martin's Foods. And then my brother has a restaurant now in Waterville, Maine.
My mother had the dream of raising her kids in America. So when I was just a little baby and Alec was just a couple years old, she just packed up and we moved to America. And then we moved to New Hampshire because there was an Armenian doctor who needed a partner. So the Armenian connection brought us to New Hampshire, and that's where we grew up.
But our success wasn't always met with open arms.
There was prejudice. You couldn't get a job in most places. You couldn't buy a home in some areas of Fresno. The 7th article of the Sunnyside Estates says that you can't, no Armenians or Japanese or Chinese or blacks allowed.
There were country clubs there where Armenians could not join a country club. Just they weren't allowed. Whatever reasons, they blackballed them, and you couldn't join a golf country club in Fresno.
We spent our grammar school days fighting. I averaged 1 fight a week in school because someone called me a damn Armenian.
He was a little guy, they picked on him, but he handled himself well.
There was a group called the XXX, which I belong to now. It started out as a gang, and it started out for protection, because what was happening is when the Armenian boys and girls would go to school, they were being picked on. So what happened was one day, 30 Armenian boys started going to school. The furthest one would start, then there'd be 2, then there'd be 3, and then by the time they got to school, there'd be 30 of them. And along the way from the farms in the rural area, they'd pick up the girls, and they'd all come together to school as a unit. And then they'd all go home together as a unit, and that was for safety. And that started a group called the XXX.
But no matter what we faced, we've never doubted our love for America.
Land of freedom, land of dignity, land of possibility, land of perpetual hope. But above all else, for me at least, freedom of expression, freedom of lifestyle, freedom of belief, and freedom of being and becoming.
In 1920, I came here, so I was 5 years old. My grandmother took me out of the orphanage, and she was going to come to America, God's country, and she brought me out. And everybody was so happy that I'm going to a beautiful country, which is true. True.
The lights amazed me. I thought, my God, it's like a dreamland, and I've just been told and heard so much, and thought it was going to be one of the most amazing, like crazy, like cars flying and, you know, some gold growing on the trees or whatever.
We grew up seeing our mother, thank God. She'd wash up every morning and look up and say, thank God we're in this free land of liberty, you know. And because they were one of the survivors of that massacre of 1915. And this is why we use that as our company logo, the Liberty Bell. And one of our farms is named the Liberty Farm.
There has never been a better time to be Armenian if you're living in the United States. There has never been more freedom, more protection, more security, more vitality, more achievement, more unfettered achievement, more good realities than there is now. And that's a powerful thing.
Becoming American meant balancing assimilation with our ethnic and cultural identity.
My grandmother Osniv would say to me, Menk Hayek, we are Armenian. Anonk Odaren, they are foreigners. Anonk Amerikatsien, they are Americans. So here I had this idea that we live in America, but they are the foreigners. So there was a kind of insistent pride that we were something special, something different, but also something apart.
My keenest memory as a child is that I went to public school and it wasn't too far away from my grandparents' house. So I would go to my grandparents' house for lunch. While everybody else was sitting in school, you know, eating tuna melts, I would be eating tas kebab and lamb stew and baklava and pilaf for lunch. And I would listen to my grandparents talk. It had so much impact on me that in the middle of my day, as a young kid, I would have this thoroughly Armenian experience in my grandparents' house with the smells of their house, their carpets, the music, the sound of their language, the food, and then I would go back to my American school with my American friends.
It started at a very early age where people would just say, well, what are you? And even in second grade, I'd say, well, I'm Armenian. And they say, what is that, a tree? A food? And it was frustrating because here I was, being told at home, hey, you're different, you're special, yet when I went out to school in public, nobody even knew what I was. They thought I was a tree.
As you entered puberty, you began to resent the fact that you were an Armenian. Why couldn't I have been Irish? You know, after all, the Irish girls are all good-looking. You have this feeling of resentment. But then you get a little bit older, 16 perhaps, and you start to seek out your own identity, who you are, what you are. You know, I have nothing to be ashamed of. I'm an Armenian. I'm just as good as the Irish. I'm just as good as the Yankees. I'm just as good as anybody else. And sometimes at that point, you may go over the edge, too. You may become too nationalistic, and I think at one point I became too nationalistic. But then so much so that I went to Lebanon to enter a monastery, and I didn't see the American flag for 9 months, and I missed Howard Johnson's fried clams. And then I saw the American flag 9 months later. I started to cry. That was my flag. I'm an American. I'm as an American as I am Armenian. All right, and so I found that balance.
We would be engaged on Sundays, for example, in large extended family gatherings. And our American friends, you know, could never figure out, why are the Balakians in there for so long? Why don't they just get out here and play ball with us? What's going on in there, you know? And as my one neighbor used to say, what are you guys doing, dining with the president? You know? And I used to say, hey, I don't have an answer for you. I didn't understand why this was all so important to us, but it was. And as kids, of course, you rebel against it. You want to be suburban. You want, you know, the quick potato puffs in the oven, that quick frozen burger in a pan, a gulp of Mountain Dew, and maybe a Twinkie, and you want to be out on the streets. But it wasn't the way it worked in our house. It was still connected to those rhythms of old world culture. And then, you know, you really, as an adult, you come to realize how important that is and what a gift that is, how much that's given you, and how much you want to keep it alive yourself.
And for nearly 1,700 years, nothing has kept our culture more alive than our church.
The story starts with a beautiful woman, believe it or not, whose name is Harib Simeh. Her picture is right there in this church. And she was a Christian who the Armenian king Dirtat wanted to marry.
And Turdat put a monk named Grigor, or Gregory, called Gregory the Illuminator, in a pit.
And Gregory was in the pit because he earlier had been discovered to be the son of a man who had killed the king's father.
And according to the legend, St. Gregory spent 14 years in this pit. At the same time, the king tries to force himself upon the beautiful Harib Simeh. She resists. In fact, he even is able to fend off the king, and the king, in anger, has her and all her companions martyred.
And as a result of killing Harib Simeh,
the king became kind of crazy, and he needed medical help, and there was none available, except his sister had a dream, which was repeated 3 times, where Gregory is the only person who could cure the brother. So Gregory, however, was taken out of this deep dungeon, and he prayed over this king who wished his death. And he brought him to health. And the king said, "Who is this Jesus in whose name you prayed? And I'm well." And he told him all about Christ and his teachings. And the king said, "I want to be a Christian. And not only I, but all my subjects." And that took place in the year 301 AD, when he declared Christianity as a state religion.
today, centuries later, and despite many obstacles, the church remains a simple fact of Armenian American life.
About age 15, 16, I came to my mom and I said, "Ma, I don't want to go to the Armenian church anymore. I don't understand what's going on. It's sort of boring. I want to go to the Methodist church because all my friends are going there. The people I play with are going to the local Methodist church. It's close to home." And I remember my mother suddenly became very tall, and she looked at me and she said, "You were born in that church, you'll be married in that church, and you'll die in that church." And she's right, 2 out of 3 so far.
I'll never forget, I was picked up at our hotel in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, by a young priest, a very militant Armenian nationalist priest. And we're going to Echmiadzin, which is the holy see of the Mother Church of Armenia. We're going through the streets, and in the Soviet Union, the Communist Party would always have these red banners with slogans, you know. And he says, "Mr. Jurechin," he's talking to me in Armenian, he says, "You read Russian, what does that say?" I said, "Well, it says unity of the people in the party." He said, "You know, you're really not a real good Armenian." And I said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "A real good Armenian would have translated that, the unity of the people and the church."
There's only one Armenian institution that is worldwide and has existed for 1,700 years. That's the church. All other Armenian institutions come and they go, whereas the church has remained. So in a very real sense, the church has been the worldwide repository of Armenian identity.
All the kids in my hometown all went to the same Catholic church, so therefore I was somehow this tremendous outsider because I went to this other place, and they had no comprehension of what I was doing. The hard time dealing with the fact that where I went there was Jesus, and where they went there was Jesus. They just couldn't believe. They thought they had the lock on Jesus and the cross. And what, you have communion too? What, you have? You know, yeah, we do all those things. You know, baptized. We're Christians long before you were, buddy.
What happens for me in church is that there's always a sermon in Armenian and a sermon in English, and there is always the singing of the Lord's Prayer in Armenian. Now, I don't know why this moves me so to sing the Lord's Prayer in Armenian.
Հայ մեր որ հերգինս ես սուրբ եղեցի անուն քո, եկեցի արքայություն քո, եղեցի գամ քո, որպես հերգինս եւ հերգինս, սաց մեր հանապազոր, դուր մեզ այսօր, թող մեզ պարտիզմե, որպես եւ մենք թող մերոց պարտաբանած, եւ մի դանիրս մեզի փորձություն, արպրգայջ, զիքոյ արքայություն, եսորություն եւ փառքավիտյան սավիտիս։
It is said that to be Armenian, one must be a bearer of history, who never forgets the countless Armenians who lost their lives in the genocide.
So they took all our poets, writers, and all famous people away. They were carried away, and they never came back.
The Armenian genocide was a dying empire's attempt, under cover of total war, to eliminate once and for all a minority within its borders.
So when the war started, the Turkish people come, go all the stores, all the houses, took all the Armenian people out. Come your house, you can get out. They took it out, everybody, to take them to their doors. That's the last step, they could kill you.
Armenians had lived in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire, for hundreds of years. And they were actually considered the loyal people of the Ottoman Empire until the 19th century. And then in the age of nationalism, Armenians began to conceive of themselves more and more as a nation like others that had rights, that ought to have some representation. They formed their own political institutions, councils, political parties, and so forth. In an empire, the Ottoman Empire, which itself was dying and which was determined to crush any of these national movements. So in 1915, during World War I, the then young Turk government of the Ottoman Empire, led by Enver Talat and Cemal Pasha, decided that it was going to end the Armenian problem once and for all, that it was going to deport Armenians from eastern Anatolia, where the bulk of them lived, and in the process began massacring and murdering, basically, hundreds of thousands of Armenians.
They were sent on grueling death marches through the mountains, through the deserts, into the most unhospitable regions of the Ottoman Empire, the deserts of Syria and Mesopotamia. These were extermination marches. They were not deportations for security reasons, although they have been presented as such. They were very much extermination marches.
My two grandmothers, my two grandfathers, my sisters, my brothers, 17 people from my family, it's all gone. I'm the only one living, from God's help. That's all.
The very first events in the genocide were the separation of Armenian soldiers who had been in the Turkish army, fighting for the Turkish government. They were taken out of the army, they were made into work battalions, they were then asked basically to dig their own graves, and they were shot. So the first thing they did in the genocide was remove what you would call the muscle.
And my brother-in-law, who was graduate from American College, he was a Protestant. They cut his head. They cut his head. He was not dead yet. They buried alive.
They also, at the same time, rounded up people in Istanbul, intellectuals, deputies to the parliament, because there were Armenians in the Ottoman parliament, removed them on April 24th, 1915. It's the day we commemorate as the Genocide Day, and killed them. So you got rid of the brains, the head of the nation. And then they could deal at their leisure with women, children, old people, and eventually, drive them out of the cities, starve them to death, rape them, and murder them.
All I see around me, bodies. I'm waking some of them, My grandmother was dead. And a few others that I knew, neighbors used to be, you know, congregated together at night. They were all dead. Some kids were dead. One little girl was sitting, you know, crying. I couldn't help myself. How could I help the other? You know what I mean? I was lost. And that's the last time I saw my mother.
You know, most of our grandparents are orphans. You know, the reality is, like most Armenians that are here today are children of orphans. So the idea of an entire race being a race of orphans is quite a powerful kind of feeling, and it does get passed on.
What I knew about being Armenian as a child was depressing and sad. What I knew was this sadness that my ancestors held, even though they did not discuss it all the time, even though it existed in whispers and silence, it was there. And what was intolerable for me as a child was that a genocide had happened to my ancestors and the world didn't know, nobody knew.
I never forget those things happen. Sometimes I sleep, my dream comes, oh my God, this happened, that happened, this happened. I go crazy myself. I said, thank God, God saved me. I'm living, I should be thankful.
One is permanently changed by one's understanding of what human life on the planet can be at its worst, and one can never get away from that. We're stuck staring evil in the face, both in the mass murder of millions of innocent people, as well as in the perpetrators' continual denial.
What we must do is learn from it, to do everything possible to avoid any such thing happening again in the future, certainly for the Armenians, certainly for the peoples in the region, and certainly in an international basis. And then to really engage in the politics of reconciliation. I mean, that is my view of it. But it is a major historic experience of the Armenian people. And the major issue is that the Armenian people want to see the Turkish government recognize the fact that there was a genocide.
I think there was always this expectation that we would carry on that memory, so that if recognition wasn't coming in the next 5 years, it wasn't going to be forgotten for the next 20. And I think that there is that kind of unspoken you know, passing of responsibility from one generation to the next.
We can be a witness to the genocide. We can help bring it to the attention of the world. We can perhaps be a force that it should not ever happen again in the world. And maybe we, the Armenians, can be a great aid in doing that, to helping stamp out that evil, that human evil that exists.
I should like to see any power of the world destroy this race, this small tribe of unimportant people whose history is ended, whose wars have all been fought and lost, whose structures have crumbled, whose literature is unread, whose music is unheard, whose prayers are no longer uttered. Let us say that it is again 1915, there is war in the world. Destroy Armenia. See if you can do it. See if they will not live again. See if they will not laugh again. See if you can stop them from mocking the big ideas of the world. Go ahead. Try to destroy them.
If anything helped us rebuild after the genocide, it was the priority we place on family.
Every Armenian has a story that they can tell you of their grandparents, their parents themselves, that would read like some novel, okay? You wouldn't believe it. And yet, when they get together, they can sit down and they can enjoy themselves. That is important. You know where they enjoy themselves the most? When they're together in a family. When they sit down, they eat, they drink, the children are there, the grandchildren are there, the grandparents are there, the neighbors are there. Anybody can walk into the house.
The hard work, the ethics, the honesty, the integrity. These are all taught within the family, and I think that's why most Armenian families are cohesive units, because of the fact that we're all together and we try to help each other.
We were 4 kids growing up, and it was always mother, father, and the kids at dinner table. I mean, you sat together. There was no, you kids eat now, we'll eat later. When we sat down, there were 6 of us at the table for every dinner that I can remember.
When anybody enters the house, they kiss everybody in the house. When somebody leaves the house, they kiss everybody in the house. And this could happen 4 or 5 times a day. But it is unthinkable that you would enter the home or leave the home without kissing everybody.
My grandfather used to put me on his lap and say that we are here because we are strong and because we are smart and because we got away, and you're going to be smart, you're going to be strong, and you're going to go to college, and you're going to achieve. That just keeps getting said to you again and again and again, and with a lot of love, my parents, my grandparents, my extended family, extremely loving family.
My mom and dad are the most influential people of my life. They taught me that I could do anything. They always set high goals and high standards, but never with the type of pressure on either my brother or I. And I guess the greatest gift they gave us is our self-esteem.
Lessons were taught about character, about ethics, and so forth from early childhood at home by my grandmother, this wonderful soul who dedicated herself to raise my sister and I. From my I received my values. On the base of those values, I built knowledge base. But none of them have changed, could have obtained without having my early upbringing in an Armenian home.
And it was in the home that we learned to speak our language.
My grandmother would say things like, "You must learn Armenian because God speaks Armenian. The language in heaven is Armenian."
We had a rule in the house. We weren't allowed to speak English. And in fact, my cousins had a rule too, and if they spoke any English word they used, they'd have to put a nickel into the bottle, into the change bottle. They had to pay for it. Yeah.
We had this secret language, so to speak, because we spoke Armenian fluently, and we'd be shopping in the mall, and then we'd see somebody that we were trying to avoid, or a classmate of mine, and I'd start talking to Alec in Armenian, and it was this great secret language. It was almost like Ubby-Dubby or Pig Latin, you know, those languages that kids speak, but for us it was Armenian.
When we are in an environment where everybody else around us speaks English, and my children want to say something to me and they say it in Armenian, I feel so proud. I feel very, very special. Especially when the Armenian words come out of their mouth. It is like a Beethoven symphony.
There's one interesting story. Ross Bagdasarian, I don't know, he was called, he took the name David Seville. He wrote The Chipmunks and Come On to My House with Bill Saroyan. He was a very, very good friend of mine. And he had a grandmother that lived in Fresno, and she lived in his house for some 20 years or so, and next to her were English American speaking people. And she said to Ross one day when he went to visit her, she says, "Would you believe," she said, "I've lived next to," and she spoke not one word of English. She'd been in this country for 20, 30 years. She said to him, "Can you believe these stupid Americans next to me? They can't speak one word of Armenian, and they've lived next to me for 30 years.
Our language, our alphabet, was created specifically for the translation of the Bible into Armenian. It was created specifically for that reason. The first book written in Armenian is the Bible.
There's an unusual power in a language which is not only a means of transmitting the meaning of words, but also it is a way of transmitting something of the culture and the pathos of the people, and it is really a way of communicating and establishing unity, the spirit of unity with each other.
I love to sing in the language. I love to express in the language.
And another thing we got from our families were those names.
It's easy to tell an Armenian because they usually have IAN at the end of their name.
I'm a member of what I feel to be a small club of people who all their names end in IAN or YAN were easily identifiable. And on any roster where I see a list of names, I always look for the IANs and always want to meet whoever that person is.
Knowing the meaning of the last names is fun. Like a certain last name will mean, you know, knife maker, or in my case, it's eternal power. You know, it's really.
I always thought that I was entitled to about 10% additional vote credits for the fact that I even ran for the office with a name like mine.
My grandfather's name is Papazian. He came over to this country, to Portland, Maine, from Turkey in 1920. And although I never knew him, obviously, he wanted to assimilate quickly and didn't want to use the name Papazian. So he saw the name Martin on the side of a truck, and he took the name. He also took the truck, but that's a whole different thing.
Very few will disagree. One of the best things that came from our families was the food.
My favorite Armenian food is green beans with tomato sauce.
Sarma, which is rolled grape leaves with rice and meat, is one of my favorites.
A stuffed lamb shoulder with sour rice that my mother makes.
My mother made, I think, the best yalanchi in the world. She would wrap each one of those things, you know, with her loving, tender heart.
Lavash is the staff of life. It's the body of Christ, the staff of life, all in one.
My favorite Armenian was the terik that they would put on the bottom of the rice, because you would chisel it off and there were little crispy pieces of tortilla. I used to actually eat it with maple syrup on top.
And my grandmother made this wonderful thing on special breakfasts on the weekends called lochma, which now I understand is just fried dough. But then it was so romantic, lochma.
My grandmother made this terrific dish called bastich. It's what today is called fruit roll-ups.
Armenians always felt they were immersed in the yogurt thing from the time they arrived on American soil. And Americans then got crazy about yogurt, I think in the 60s when it went national, you know, with fruit flavors. So that was a nice bridge. Armenians now felt they were doing, Americans were doing what they'd been doing for the last 2,000 years.
You will find, okay, that every Armenian household that you walk into, for some reason, they save, you know, the Colombo yogurt containers. They save them. Just Armenian mothers save Colombo yogurt containers.
Nothing is comparable to Armenian food. It's about the best food in the world. And even non-Armenians, whenever they did have an opportunity to either join us on a picnic or something, or where my mother would prepare something and give it to neighbors, they all just loved it.
It's the best, and everybody knows that.
My dad brought me up how to smell and eat a true tomato. I mean, he made sandwiches for me with tomato, cucumber, and onion, just put it there, and he did like a little fire and made the shish kebab, and he marinated himself. And every family has a master marinator. In our whole gang of Petrosians, my father was the most respected marinator amongst his brothers and all the relatives. So I mean, him doing it for me, it was like he was making me into a man.
It's very typical of the Armenian culture that if you go to somebody's home, there is the quantity of food is in direct relationship to how happy they are about their guest, and it's supposed to be abundant. And it's supposed to be ridiculously abundant. So if you invite 10 people, you must cook for 100. And when you have a whole bunch of leftovers, you must complain that nobody ate enough.
We were going back to play Providence, and I get a phone call from a Providence sports writer. He said, well, you know, we have a lot of Armenians in Providence. I said, oh, is that right? I says, I want to find a good Armenian restaurant. I want to get some Armenian food. And I could not believe it. When we get in town, we practice. After our practice, there was about 4 or 5 sets of Armenian people that had cooked food, brought it over to the practice. It was so much that I took it to the hotel and I fed my whole team. We all ate Armenian food.
Today we call America home, but this by no means diminishes our love for our historic homeland.
Ararat is, of course, the symbol of Armenia, but it's not in Armenia proper. It's in historic Armenia. It's in Turkey across the border. But we Armenians are proud that we have the better view of Ararat.
From everyone's balcony, or as you come out of your house, and if you have a clear view of a street, the first thing you see sort of hugging you, that's Mount Ararat standing right there.
This mountain that rises up out of nowhere and has been there all the way back into the Bible, and it hooks up Armenians to history.
Ancient history, in fact. Ararat is where Noah's Ark supposedly landed.
My grandfather used to say everybody is a descendant of Noah, so everybody's Armenian. I mean, like, he used to tell me Cary Grant was Armenian. I always liked that one.
It's a remarkable thing. My feet touched in Yerevan in Armenia, and honestly, I felt like I was home. I don't know how to explain that in words. It was such a gut reaction. I mean, this was a country that looked nothing like my home in Portland, Maine, but I really felt, for the first time in my life, I could just be me.
You walk down the street and everybody looks like you, acts like you, talks like you. You see everybody speaking the same language, and it's a wonderful feeling.
It was just this sense of this, even though I am American born in this country, it was the sense of this is truly where I'm from.
It was like, my God, it was the biggest feast I could encounter. I was going back to 2,500 years. I was in the setting where it all began. I was in the church headquarters there. When I went to Echmiadzin, the seat of Armenian church in the world, I was so moved hearing Holy, Holy, Holy when the choir was singing.
Going into the Armenian highlands and seeing 4th, 5th, and 6th century churches almost growing out of the terrain in this elegant, gorgeous design and architecture with this intricate stone carving of pomegranates and grapes and this beautiful Armenian script on it. What was deeply, really affected me. I mean, it blew me away. It made me feel the presence of the whole culture, that it was embodied in those fabulous creations of imagination and building and civility.
When I was in Armenia, and I was visiting the Shahinians, and the woman Gulnara was in charge of cultural affairs in Yerevan, and her husband was a physicist. Very intellectual people. And all night long when I was visiting them, they were talking about the past and the massacres and the intellectual stimulation and all the unbelievable artists that have come from the country, and they were just infiltrating my mind with how important it was for me to come back to the United States and spread the word, and we're not just a country of self-pitying victims, we've got all this to say. And finally her husband, who was a physicist, said, "Stop it, enough of this, I can't hear it anymore. Andrea, do you know what makes Armenians laugh?" I said, "No." He held up his little finger and he went like this. I laughed. He said, "You see anything?"
Khor Virab, which means deep dungeon, is the pit in which Gregory was thrown to die. As I was climbing down the steps into this pit, I had goosebumps. And I had a cassette player, and all of us young people at the time knelt down almost automatically, instinctively, and wanted to sing a prayer which is very close to the hearts of Armenians, part of our Armenian liturgy. And it was so moving, and I tried to, I was almost disturbing the moment, I guess. I tried to record it, it wouldn't work. I pushed the button, it wouldn't work. And when we went up again, I pushed the button, it worked. And we all concluded maybe it wasn't meant to be recorded.
The flag of the Republic of Armenia.
The love we feel for our homeland is revitalized because today, a small part of historic Armenia is independent and free.
I don't think that any of us growing up in this country ever believed really deep down in our hearts that we would live long enough to see an independent Armenia.
I cannot tell you, it was like pinch me. I mean, I can't believe that in my lifetime I would be able to say Armenia is free. I think I just stood there and cried.
It was the first nation out of all the republics who brought Lenin's statue down with ropes, and they had broken the bottom part, and they actually slammed it down, and there were tanks, and it was the first thing the Russian government had to deal with, and it was, you know, unheard of.
The fact that we were going to have a free country and we could raise the flag without having any repercussions and without having the Turkish government tell us what to do, I mean, or the Russian government tell us what to do, and the fact that people could speak Armenian and go to church and not have to live within the constraints of communism.
If you had told my grandparents that there would be an Armenian republic, a free Armenian state, they would have been bewildered. And here there is one, all this time later, after so much near annihilation. So I think those, in ironic and paradoxical ways, I want to keep underlining the ironies and paradoxes of saying this, that after genocide has come, like out of the ashes, the phoenix, Armenia is a real presence in the large planet and its chorus of voices, and we're proud and happy to be here.
And our contributions have been many. In music, art, literature, theater, business, and especially in everyday life. All the Armenian Americans who work hard each day to provide for themselves and their families. Our numbers may be small, but our spirit is unequaled.
As an Armenian, I believe that we have brought to this great banquet table, which is America, our small share, but our unique share.
And there's no debating that, because after nearly 3,000 years, we're a unique people. So when one asks, what makes one Armenian? The answer is complicated. It's a combination of our culture, our history, and our personal experiences.
I feel I'm part of a historical chain of being that has produced me, nurtured me, and made me what I am.
We were the first Christian nation. We have our own distinct, unique alphabet like no other language. And people say, oh, well, you know, what is Armenian like? Is it like Greek? Is it like Russian? It's not like anything. It is sincerely, truly unique. It is different.
What makes you Armenian is sort of believing you're Armenian, reviving and promoting that tradition. You know, I mean, I see, for me, it's much less than a thing that's in the blood, that's sort of automatic, or it's the way I look, that I have dark eyes. It's more that parents, teachers, musicians like my grandfather, artists, intellectuals, talk about this, promote this tradition, remind the next generation, force the next generation to remember who they are.
from my father telling me, you must be proud of your heritage, that stuck with me a great deal. I really respected my father, and I thought, if anything, I'm going to make sure that they see the good side of the Armenian people. So when I came to Los Angeles and got into the acting business, I was the first one to say, I'm Armenian, you know. And my wife used to kid me. She said, I mean, all right, so we know you're Armenian. You don't have to advertise it so much.
I think there are two groups, right? The group that whose mission it is to have our past acknowledged, and they're not going to stop until that is out there. And they're not going to be cut down by anything anymore. They're just going to be out front. They're going to spread the word with as much vehemence and aggression and pride as they can. That's one set. Then there's another set of, yeah, pass the lamb. There's that set. That's what I came from.
The Armenians have walked humbly in the world. They haven't been aggressive. They have not retaliated in anger. They have not lost goodness of their souls.
Armenians are very fun-loving people, very joyous, because when you have suffered a lot, you know when you have the opportunity, you better enjoy well.
And we do enjoy life, a fact we owe entirely to our determination to survive.
I think the word survivor is an absolute perfect word to describe the Armenian people.
There's no question in anyone's mind that they're great survivors. There's nothing else there's really no debating that.
When you read the early history and the experience of your family, your own family, of other families in America, people who came with nothing, no resources, no capital, no language skills, and managed within one generation to make it, to basically become a sort of respectable, as I said before, middle-class community, that's quite an extraordinary achievement.
One of the most powerful examples of our spirit is found in the book, The 40 Days of Musada.
It's about a mountain during the genocide, a mountain that the Armenians had taken over, and it were just really peasants, and they had no arms, and they had very little food, and they were up against the Turkish army, who was very well armed and prepared. And if I remember correctly, a little Armenian boy went down and got food and got arms, and they outsmarted the enemy. And it was through their desire to survive and the importance of understanding what survival meant to them, and using their wits and using their brains and using their ingenuity.
The ancient Armenian manuscripts, they all started out with a few sentences about the time and the period in which the person who transcribed the manuscript was living. And it's just heartrending, and this goes on for 300 or 400 years. You know, they talk about the arrows were flying and darkened the sky, and our blood was running like rivers, and it's just one after another, generation after another, living in these kind of circumstances. You see that Armenians have learned to always pick up the pieces and go on. I mean, it's like a reflex. No matter what terrible thing comes now, it's like we've been conditioned for 1,000 years to just pick up the pieces and go on.
Armenian people are almost like its entire history is one of one calamity after another, because they were on the crossroads of the crossing empires. Expanding and retracting empires and battlefield. I feel very proud that they've survived, that many empires are gone. Roman Empire is no longer there, Ottoman Empire is no longer there, Persian Empire is no longer there, the traditional one I'm talking about. Alexander's empire is no longer there, Mongol Empire is not there, Tatar Empire is not there. All of them have vanquished Armenia.
And we're still here, you know that song, and I'm still here. That's pretty phenomenal.
Not only are we here, we're here to stay, to live, dance, and make music, and continue as a people, a nation, a voice of history.
The sadness has gone. They're celebrating life and triumph, as if you've been thirsty for all of these things all your life, and all of a sudden you've been given a chance to witness and to enjoy and to build and to triumph and to be and to become.
If you would like a VHS copy of this program, call 1-800-847-7793. Funding for the Armenian Americans was made possible by a grant from the Manoogian and Simone Foundation.
A story that my grandmother told me, my aunt told me. It was a story that traveled around our family a great deal, and it was a story about, in a nutshell, a rich woman and a poor woman who have to go, as everyone does in life, to knock on the door of fate. And you have to go and call on fate. And the rich woman goes dressed to the teeth in her silks and diamonds with a huge roasted lamb and gorgeous garnishes around it and so forth. And fate turns her away, and she's stunned. The poor woman who lives out in the country, a beggar in black oilcloth, rags, is terrified to make her call on fate because she's so abjectly poor and humiliated by her condition. So she finds the only thing she can, which is a dead black dog along the roadside, and brings it to Fate's house. And Fate answers the door and says, "I'm so glad you're here. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Come in." And as a kid, I'd hear that tale, and I'd be a little frightened and a little bewildered. What was I supposed to make of it? Why did fate spurn the rich woman, take in the poor woman? My grandmother never liked to analyze overly. She didn't want to do literary criticism with me. She wanted me just to feel the power of that parable. And I use that parable in my book, and I ask the reader to kind of take that parable and pull it through the book like a thread. But that's a small example of the kind of powerful parables that we grew up hearing now and then.
It wasn't until 4 years ago that I decided to examine my roots. This is from my show, Andrea Martin, Nude, Nude, Totally Nude. This is really true. For the longest time, I thought I was Jewish. Big nose, dark eyes, pushy. It all seemed to fit. Part of the reason it did is that I desperately wanted to be something. My parents had gone to great lengths to bury their ethnic identity. We lived in Portland, Maine, but I knew we weren't Yankees. When we talked, you could pick it up in Canada, which, by the way, I thought was the old country. I said, "Pass the lamb. Don't hog the pilaf." And our name was so nondescript, Martin. Even in show business, you could be Mary, you could be Dean. I knew I was an immigrant. I mean, we all are. Either you came over on the boat or your family was in the original cast of Dances with Wolves. Eventually, I cornered my family, and they told me I was Armenian. Distant cousin to Cher, Charles Aznavour, Mike Connors, Clarabelle the Clown. Why couldn't they just stop with Cher?
And you know who else? Arlene Francis. Remember her? Remember? Is it larger than a bread box? Ha, ha, ha. It's Arlene Francis. My grandparents' name, my grandfather's name was Papazian, but when he came over to the country in 1920, he saw the name Martin on the side of a truck, so he took the name. He also took the truck. I decided it was time for the real Andrea Papazian to please stand up, so I went to Armenia. Now I'm going to just flash forward here. I went to Armenia, and you know about Armenia. You know that it was a tiny little republic, and you know where it is, surrounded by Azerbaijan and Turkey and Iran. But I knew nothing of this, and I flew over on Aeroflot, the devil's own airline. Flies were living in the plane. Seat belts didn't fasten. One stewardess slept, the other one smoked as she pointed to the non-smoking sign. It was over 100 degrees, and women sat in heavy wool coats guarding their bags. By the time my feet did touch the motherland, I was just thankful to be alive. But still the voice kept saying to me in my head, go to Armenia, go to Armenia. Eventually I got to Armenia, my country, my people. For the next 10 days, Armenians welcomed me with open arms. Andrea, did you know Armenia was first country in the world to adopt Christianity? Andrea, did you know Noah landed his ark here? Andrea, did you know Armenians invented the alphabet? We are most educated country in the world, 0% illiteracy. By the time I got back to the States, I was a born-again Armenian. I read every book by William Soroyan, listened to every note by Khachaturian, performed in Armenian benefits with Eric Bogosian, did readings with Leslie Avazian, and if I hadn't been in such good health, I would have booked a suicide with Dr. Jack Kevorkian. But still, the voice persisted, go to Armenia. 4 years later, I'm sitting on a plane. I'm coming back from New York to Los Angeles. A woman sits beside me. I don't hear her speak. I don't see her read, but I smell a familiar smell. So I turn to her and I say, excuse me, are you Armenian? She could barely speak English, but understood the word Armenian and nodded yes. What I really wanted to say was, you smell like my grandmother. Can I hug you? And then it dawned on me. I had studied everything about my ancestors, but knew nothing about my own family. I couldn't recall one word of my own grandmother's. She lived with us for 26 years, in fact, in the room next to mine, and I could not recall one conversation. It was my mother who told me that Nanny had been brought to America when she was 15, in a prearranged marriage, and had 6 children with a man she never loved, a man twice her age. She had lost her father and brothers in the genocide and had to leave her mother behind. She could never return to her homeland. I remember her sitting for hours, always in black, knitting and staring out the window. And I remember wanting to make Nanny happy, but I couldn't. I was a child and I didn't understand. So I ran away from that sadness. I ran all the way up Mount Ararat, for God's sakes, looking for Noah's Ark. For the next 5 hours, I treated the woman next to me like my own grandmother. I propped her feet up with pillows, put cushions behind her back, and when the stewardess asked her what she wanted for breakfast, and she said, okay, I said, she'll have French toast and omelet, and bring her a mimosa. She's had enough coffee. We toasted. Neither one of us knew what each other said. Ah, yes, I don't know. Okay, yes, okay, yes. For 5 hours, and the only words between us were, I don't know. Okay, yes. Then right before we were about to land, a phrase I hadn't heard since I was a child came back to me. Tzavet danem, I said. She hugged me. Tzavet danem, she said. There were tears in our eyes. Armenians say this to people they love. Tzavet danem, let me take away your pain. We then made our final descent to Los Angeles, and at that moment, we held hands, and as we landed, a voice whispered in my ear, welcome to Armenia, you are home.
In 1979, or no, it was 80, when the MGM burned, the hotel in Las Vegas, and that's where my father worked for many years. And working hard there, we always had what we needed, but it was about my dad going back to work the next day, and the hotel burned and it shut down for almost a year. And Dad didn't have have a job during that time, and a lot of people were really worried about getting their jobs back. And Mr. Krikorian went out of his way to assure my dad that, you know, in time he'll have a place, you know. And there was a sense of loyalty towards, just inside the genes of being an Armenian, and that was, my dad took a lot of pride in, you know, that we look out for each other, you know. And then when that hotel kind of sold and went to turn into Bally's, then Kirk had plans to build his, you know, Gigunda, amazing, you know, resort, you know, bring your family and live like kings place. He again went out of his way to let my dad know that he has a place with him always, you know. And that wasn't because my dad was the easiest guy to get along with, you know, but in many ways he was, but because they're Armenians. And I always had the sense growing up when I was 10 years old, 1980, just, you know, if there's an IAN at the end of your name, then you're all good.